Welcome to my second video, where we are looking to identify skill and capacity issues surrounding speed and agility training. As mentioned, the two disciplines we're going to be assessing are speed and agility, and more importantly, change of direction skills, with the specific skills including a 10-meter sprint from a falling start and a 10-meter sprint into a 180-degree turn. Here is an example of a lack of skill when performing the 10-meter sprint as demonstrated by footballer Harry. Harry was instructed to stand tall with his heels raised. On command, would start to lean forward whilst maintaining good posture to initiate the sprint, with a falling start placing him in an optimal position to accelerate. When analysing Harry's performance, one major fault was identified. During initial strides, it's clear that Harry is displaying a collapse in the trunk, leading to flexion at the hips. This is significant as this poor posture negates the involvement of the triple extension of the knees, hips and ankles, need to apply maximum horizontal force into the ground to propel the body forward. It can be argued that the collapse at the trunk could be both a skill and a capacity issue, as the poor mechanics displayed can be attributed to tension through the hip flexors, or poor recruitment of the glute maximus and spinal erectors, indicate a capacity issue. However, it could also be a result of lack of technical awareness, which can be improved through repetition of the correct movement mechanics. To screen for any capacity issues, the Trendelenburg test was used to identify instability of the hips, particularly glute medius. This proved a negative test as Harry was able to lift his knee off the ground on both sides without displaying a collapse at the hip on the standing leg. The Thomas test was also used to screen for mobility deficits through hip flexion extension. This also proved to be a negative test. The 30-second glute bridge test also proved a negative result, as Harry could feel his glutes activating on both sides. Therefore, we can rule out capacity as the reason for skill breakdown. To improve Harry's posture during initial acceleration, additional resistance using a sled push was utilised as an external method of cueing Harry the optimal body position for effective acceleration mechanics. Harry was instructed to lean forward into the sled, maintaining alignment from the head through to the heel with powerful knee punch when pushing the sled. When retesting Harry's acceleration performance after the sled intervention, Harry has displayed much improved posture during initial strides of the sprint with a more prominent triple extension pattern. Here is an example of a lack of capacity displayed by rugby player Nico. In the performance of Nico's 10-meter sprint, a few technical faults are apparent. Nico is expressing a more upright posture with a very low hip lift on the swing leg, meaning Nico is not in the optimal body position to apply and express maximal horizontal force into the floor. It should be stated that Nico is still recovering from a ruptured Achilles tendon in his right leg, which he suffered 12 months ago, indicating a potential capacity issue at the affected ankle joint, with limited ankle mobility reducing the forward motion of the tibia over the toe and limiting horizontal force production. To screen for limitation in capacity, we integrated the Thomas test again when no apparent limitation in hip flexions were observed, as Nico was able to bring his knees into his chest. However, the same could not be said for hip extension, with both sides displaying tension in the leg hanging off the box, indicating that Nico does not lack capacity to express hip flexion, and his lack of ability to express knee drive during acceleration can be skill related. However, when utilising the FMS straight leg raise to assess hamstring mobility, we can see Nico is displaying restrictions on both sides, with the left leg scoring 1 out of a possible 3, with 3 being a perfect score, and the right leg scoring a 2, indicating hamstring mobility deficits in both sides. To screen for ankle mobility following the Achilles injury, Nico is instructed to place his right foot 5 inches away from the wall and try to touch the wall with his knee whilst keeping his foot flat on the floor. As you can see, Nico is unable to reach the wall on either side, indicating insufficient ankle mobility, which might explain the limited forward lean during the sprint. The 30-second glute bridge test indicated deficits in activation of the primary hip extensors on both sides, with Nico feeling tension through the hamstring instead of the glute maximus when performing a single leg bridge. The results from the Thomas test, straight leg raise and single leg bridge test all conclude that Nico lacks capacity within the muscles that extend the hip. This might prove significant as Nico's lack of hip extension capacity could hinder his technique during a 10-meter sprint, with competent acceleration mechanics being highly influenced by the involvement of the hip extensor muscles, not to mention reducing the involvement of the triple extension strategy. To address these movement deficiencies, ankle and hamstring mobility drills would be implemented during the warm-ups to improve range of motion and activation. We would use the kettlebell-assisted ankle mobility drill, where Nico would use the weight of the kettlebell to drive his knees over his toe whilst keeping his heel flat on the floor. We would utilise the glute bridge walkout to activate the glute maximus whilst improving eccentric hamstring strength, when Nico was instructed to lie in a bridge position and walk his feet out as far as possible without losing tension in his glutes and letting his hips drop. The band-assisted wall drill was used to improve activation of the hip extensors and improve integration of the hip flexors, when Nico was instructed to hinge back on the one leg and aggressively punch the knee forward whilst mildly extending the hip, applying force against the band. This was then followed by partner-resisted sprints to further improve acceleration mechanics, where the resistance of the partner reinforces good posture and aggressive arm and knee drive. When retesting Nico's sprint following the intervention, Nico is displaying much improved mechanics with a prominent 45-degree lean, powerful triple extension, and greater involvement of the hip flexors. Here is an example of an agility drill demonstrated with a lack of skill performed by 15-year-old rugby player Max. On performance of the 180-degree turn, Max is shortening his stride and lowering his body height when approaching the turn. However, when performing the turn, it is apparent that Max has shifted his weight towards his outside leg, sending his momentum away from the direction he wishes to turn. This inability to transfer weight can be due to a lack of ankle mobility and lack of hip flexion, meaning Max is unable to express enough ankle and hip flexion to shift his weight into the opposite direction. However, negative results from the Thomas test and knee to wall drill conclude there is no capacity deficits present, indicating a skill issue. To improve Max's change of direction skill, a simple force application drill was implemented to provide Max with feedback of the most effective movement strategy to provide force in the opposite direction. Max was instructed to assume a suitable stance for change direction, however placing weight on the outside leg whilst attempting to push me backwards. As we can see, Max wasn't successful. However, when Max applied force through the inside leg, he was able to generate enough power to move me backwards. When retesting Max's skill, he is demonstrating much improved movement mechanics as he is able to effectively load the inside leg and sink his weight into the direction he intends to travel. Demonstrating a lack of capacity when performing the 180-degree turn is former professional rugby player Matthew. When performing the turn on his left leg, we can see that Matt is able to lower his centre of mass and turn his hips into the direction he wishes to travel. However, when analysing Matt's body positioning, like Max in the previous case, it is apparent that Matt is loading his weight into his rear leg, shifting momentum away from the direction of travel with his centre of mass behind the inside leg instead of in front of his base of support. When comparing his performance on his right side, Matt is able to shift his weight onto the right ankle, ensuring his momentum is heading into the change of direction. Restrictions at the hip and ankle might explain why Matt is unable to shift his weight into the direction change. Of interest, Matt has suffered a previous Achilles tendon rupture in his left ankle. From looking at the clip, it is apparent Matt is unable to optimally utilise the affected side and sink his weight into the left ankle and make use of the positive shin angle, which is essential for effective change of direction mechanics. To screen for any capacity issues at the hip, the Trendelenburg test was again utilised to screen for weaknesses at the glute medius on the standing leg. This proved a negative test as Matt was able to lift his leg on both sides without displaying a loss of structural integrity at the hip on the standing leg. Matt's performance of the Thomas test also concluded as a negative test, as Matt was able to pull his knee into his chest on both sides, whilst allowing the straight leg to freely hang off the box on both sides, indicating sufficient hip flexion and extension. Matt also displayed suitable lateral hip flexion in the performance of the lateral lunge. When screening for ankle mobility using the 5-inch knee to wall drill, Matt is displaying limitation ankle dorsiflexion on both sides. With knowledge of Matt's previous injury in his left leg, this is significant as reduced ankle dorsiflexion can lead to increased injuries to the lower extremities during the performance of deceleration and change of direction activities. In order to address these deficits presented at the ankle joint, a strategy was implemented to improve ankle mobility whilst improving stability and capacity to absorb and produce force through the lower limb. The kneeling kettlebell ankle mobility drill was again implemented to improve Matt's ankle dorsiflexion in both legs. The use of the bodyweight step down was also utilised to help improve Matt's ankle mobility and stability under load. Matt was instructed to stand on one leg on an elevated surface and perform a single leg squat, touching the heel of the other leg gently on the floor and return to the starting position, all whilst maintaining stability through the hips, knees and ankles. The use of the lateral skater jump was implemented to improve Matt's ability to absorb force and rapidly produce force in the opposite direction. Matt was instructed to perform a single leg lateral jump using his outside leg to land under control on his opposite leg. Then using the ground reaction force off the landing leg, immediately jump back to where he started, landing under total control. Progressing the original drill should also be considered to help improve Matt's movement mechanics when changing direction. A simple regression could involve reducing the speed of the approach from a run to a jog, therefore allowing Matt more time to organise his body into the optimal positions to change direction, with the aim of increasing the speed of approach as competence improves. Matt was unavailable for filming, so Harry from the first clip helped demonstrate this drill. I hope you found this informative. Thank you for listening.